Level 4 authorization alerts did not arrive like casual admonishments or regulatory calendar invites. They arrived like padded envelopes with wax seals that only burned when touched. The label hovering on Dan Wu's rugged Marina tablet glowed with the unmistakable weight of escalation, the kind of notification nobody archived, not even accidentally. Marcus had previously treated Ashen Cove's governance like a miscompiled puzzle box designed by men who loved bylaws more than logic. But Level 4 suggested someone loved logic and supremacy equally, which made the stakes narratively spicy without becoming legally flammable. The portal identified the requester cryptically but confidently as Roland Keene, Archive Charter Custodian of Regional Development and Corporation Authority, RDIA, the body that supervised neighborhood and corporation entities when conditional oversight signatures clashed or community influence models risked systemic integrity failure. Marcus internally whistled like someone who just found a root access to the HOA board's entire psychological infrastructure. Roland Keene was not HOA, not counting, not marina. He was Ors category. He reviewed organizations like meteorologists reviewed storms, meaning he didn't cause them. He predicted their collapse patterns before anyone else smelt thunder. Adrian North, the arbitrator whose boots had shaken narrative dust earlier, stood up immediately, recognition flickering in his eyes, like a man who remembered being audited by that name once during an improperly permitted dam rezoning fiasco near Pine Ridge County, which had ended not in violence but in forced organizational humility. Caleb Rowan admired the dramatic minimalism of the alert. Elias Granger admired the chronology alignment of policy concurrency. Brent Calder admired the tablet's enjoyed suspense if given correct metadata ingestion. Dan Wu admired that someone official was finally requesting escalation instead of HOA cosplay fake Sabinas. And Grant Cole admired that Tense kept surviving because survival wasn't narrative guilt anymore, it was audit warranty. But male admiration didn't matter operationally. Roland authority did. Marcus asked Adrian what Level 4 meant procedurally. Adrian explained that at Level 4, reviewers could request expanded governance scope inspection, jurisdiction declassification risk analysis, environmental access rights enforcement review, punitive overreach telemetry evaluation, and incorporation dissolution impact regression modeling if lower-level audits indicated structural misalignment. Marcus asked whether regression modeling meant reviewing backwards or collapsing forwards. Adrian replied, yes. Marcus nodded at the recursive beauty of that answer. Roland Keene transmitted access tokens for physical audit summons sync meeting at the lake itself, scheduled for 9:30 a.m. because RDIA custodian-level officials didn't enjoy emails that required hiking. They preferred boots-on-gravel QA sessions. The group prepared quietly. Marcus boiled water again. But across the lake perimeter at HOA Shed Basel territory, Trevor, Chris, Jonah, and Luis were constructing speeches with passionate futility, unaware their audit tier had just been promoted to supporting documentation. Marcus asked Caleb if he knew Roland personally. Caleb said he met Roland once while submitting environmental autonomy boundaries for another community near Crimson Marsh Lake, a policy case that Roland had resolved by expanding public buffer telemetry until the HOA there had vaporized like debugged print statements left in static production code. Marcus liked debug print the metaphors. Adrian told the men that Roland always asked for intent first, discrepancy proof second, and sitting necessity last, meaning organizations disappeared procedurally only after a necessity evaporated naturally by corrected filings, not corrected vendettas. Marcus laminated nothing this time. He didn't need lamination anymore. He had concurrency visibility. The deputies were now attending not as cops, but witness endpoints. Brent updated field telemetry. Elias verified original signature chronology. Caleb prepared override clauses. Adrian validated sequencing freeze. And Marcus uploaded nothing new yet, because Level 4 reviewers enjoyed ceremony before commit. Marcus whispered to his tent, which had become narrative QA certification mascot rather than mere fabric geometry. Hang tight, even auditors like sequencing reveals. The tent slapped approvingly, which metaphysically meant nothing, but cinematically meant everything.
Marcus checked the county public registry annex Roland had referenced and noticed the HOA's legal influence tag labeled conditional visual stewardship permission had expired last year due to non-submission. Expired permissions turned authority into fossilized UI. Marcus asked if expired influence permissions misled 911 calls. Does Keene escalate automatically? Adrian said escalation doesn't dissolve. Roland dissolves. Escalation only invites him to. And that was the moment Marcus realized he hadn't engineered a rebellion. He had engineered a necessity exorcism pipeline, where organizations were evaluated not by aesthetics, but by jurisdiction survival metrics in daylight. Will he show up angry? Marcus smiled slightly and replied, no, he'll show up thorough. But thoroughness dissolved kingdoms faster than outrage, the men said by the tent edge, awaiting next stakeholder arrival. The portal glowed neutrally now. Marcus liked glowing states, but level 4 wasn't glowing, it was incoming.
The sound of engines returned first, low and official, nothing like the HOA's usual community golf cart parades of indignation. These were county vehicles carrying environmental review staff and incorporation specialists rolling toward Ashton Lake in a neat convoy that smelled of diesel, policy binders, and institutional seriousness, a scent totally incompatible with Trevor Donnelly's Fleece Vist empire. Marcus remained seated at his campsite, posture unbothered, because a man who rushed flipped narratives, but a man who waited forced systems to unmask themselves. The first to step out was Roland Keene, RDEIA custodian himself. Boots lake wet, not muddy, just informed. Jacket plain charcoal, but stitched with authority that didn't need logos to feel intimidating. Expression neutral, because neutrality was his war paint. Beside him arrived the rest of the audit's invited male ensemble. Conrad Ellison with registry tablets linked to incorporation archives, Dr. Kane Wallace carrying portable sediment classification scanners slung like scientific crossbows, Attorney Reed Tompkins with suit crisp but boots practical, the perfect hybrid of legal audit predator and GIS data philosopher, and trailing them like reality checks carrying coffee mugs were the familiar deputies Dan Wu and Grant Cole, now upgraded from dispute referees to audit witness endpoints, which annoyed no one except predictable organizations who assumed sheriffs were conflict finishers, not conflict loggers. Lastly, Brent Calder from the Marina Depot jogged up once more, holding a mirrored, rugged tablet showing live registry cross-sync overlays, legend-coded buffers, stewardship icons, deprecation flags, board attendance alerts, and concurrency charts that looked like battle plans, but were in fact documentation hygiene exercises designed by men who enjoyed threatened irrelevance for organizations that never passed QA testing. Roland scanned the campsite, not judging the tent, but verifying its existence coordinates, because review processes at level 4 required field confirmation that a disputed shoreline object wasn't violating any incorporation topology boundaries. Then came Roland's opening question, not loud, not theatrical, structurally devastating. Which governance body believes it has enforcement authority here today? The board answered by showing up panting, clipboards flapping like startled words, slogans desperate, members male and offended that their oxygen might soon be regulated. Trevor, Chris, Jonah, Luis, and newly invited board chair Kevin Marsh. Another man whose crew cut attempted professionalism, but whose gaze suggested he believed incorporation charter reviews were seasonal rituals like pumpkin spice. We enforce standards, Kevin said proudly. Roland asked, standards on deeded parcels or adjacency emotions? Kevin opened his binder and quoted aesthetic disruption decorum codes. Roland asked, and the jurisdiction for these codes is validated by which filing timestamp? Silence again, an engineer's sunrise soundtrack. Attorney Reed nudged Marcus and whispered that silence often preceded administrative evaporation. Marcus whispered back that evaporation was fine if preceded by thermodynamic justification citations. Roland crouched by the fire pit studying the group's earlier uploads. Marcus had compiled bug reports politely. Granger had verified original charter intent clauses. Roland had prepared environmental autonomy override metadata. Adrian had validated sequencing freeze handshakes. And Brent had appended GPS witnessed metric logs neutrally. Roland turned toward the board and said calmly, your original visual influence permission expired last year due to non-submission. Driver blanked like someone unplugged a router mid-meeting. Chris whispered budget lines, but trails faded under audit luminescence. Conrad updated county land art street overlays expanding public access margins correctly. Kane verified sediment autonomy classifications. Reed noted that punitive adjacency enforcement revenue collected on unowned land might constitute misattributed governance transactions if aesthetics misled 911 calls without jurisdiction alignment, which legally didn't imply criminality, but did imply incorporation scope recession. Roland asked Marcus if he wished to file adversarial escalation beyond level 4. Marcus answered truthfully, not adversarial, corrective.
ranges that would have approved that answer, Roland grinned. Roland authorized the audit continue this time, live, unfrozen, not golf cart speed, but county speed, which was faster, precisely because it wasn't emotional. But emotions spiked anyway. Kevin attempted reclaiming narrative by asking Roland if audits could dissolve HOAs automatically. Roland replied, automatically? No. Inevitably, sometimes. Marcus nodded because inevitability was his favorite design template. Roland said the board must attend the remainder of the review physically because Level 4 required witness presence verifying organizational relevance wasn't cosmetically maintained when influence permissions expired undetected. The board hated undetected expirations more than detected failures. Marcus asked Roland if he'd like coffee. Roland Keene said, only if we log who owns Shoreline Coffee thermodynamic stewardship correctly. The men laughed quietly because systems sometimes enjoy jokes while dissolving kingdoms. Marcus didn't watch humiliation today. He wanted metadata variable conditions for kingdom legitimacy get replaced by real governance auditing persistence rules. And just when Kevin believed coffee meant meeting close out, Marcus noticed Roland's scanner detect a faint but structurally ominous detail under the boathouse ownership mapping layer, a tiny hidden MD5 coded amendment titled Stewardship Continuity Transfer Clause. A clause only reviewable if someone requested level 5 escalation, which nobody had asked for yet. But the system did enjoy spontaneous prompts.
The discovery of the hidden Stewardship Continuity Clause transfer under the boathouse ownership layer sent a subtle ripple through the Level 4 review. Almost imperceptible to the HOA board, who were still trying to catch their breath, but immediately visible to Marcus, Roland, and Adrian, men trained to read metadata like radar. Marcus leaned over the rugged tablet Brent Calder held, his finger tracing encrypted hashes, timestamps, and digital signatures that mapped decades of layered authority. Elias Granger whistled softly, recognizing a clause he'd drafted decades ago but had assumed dormant, one designed to activate only if influence misalignment threatened the lake's ecosystem. A clause written with mail-coded foresight, not for theatrics, but for real governance checks. Calebron grinned, admiring Marcus's patience. The clause wasn't a trap, but an autonomous audit trigger, the kind that could activate level 5 escalation without anyone needing to call the cops or host an HOA meeting. Marcus explained that the clause effectively allowed the original incorporation signer's authority to intersect with secondary oversight rights, and if combined with Roland's level of 4 presence, it created a concurrency cascade strong enough to render any board misalignment irrelevant without a single citation or fine. Adrian North, boots still lake wet, nodded approvingly. This was procedural elegance, a mail-coded cascade where the system enforced itself quietly. Marcus tapped the tablet and noted the clause referenced all male board members present, Trevor, Chris, Jonah, Lewis, and Kevin, as data points in a live audit matrix. It didn't matter that they believed themselves rulers of the lake. The clause treated them like variables in an algorithm of governance compliance. Roland stepped forward, voice calm but weighty. We are now at the point where the system evaluates your authority based on structural accuracy rather than declarations. Misalignment will naturally deactivate your governance influence until corrected. The board squirmed visibly, though they remained stoic in male-only ritual. Bodies stiffened, clipboards clutched like talismans, unaware that talismans counted as variables now. Marcus smiled subtly. This wasn't chaos, it was inevitability executed through systemic design. The kind of male-engineered precision where irony was quiet and consequences self-applied. Brent ran the tablet's environmental buffer layer, Conrad cross-checked registry logs, Kane verified sedimental imagery against historical reports, and Reed logged legal interpretations at misaligned authority without saying a word, leaving the board to feel subtle dread. Caleb explained quietly to Marcus that the clause had been dormant because boards rarely trigger the concurrency cascade voluntarily. People like their kingdoms too much. Marcus noted that kingdom obsolescence mode was far more efficient than conflict mode. Roland asked the board if anyone could explain how enforcement rights still exist on parcels without current deeded permission or active charter compliance. Trevor stammered about aesthetics, Jonah cited old bylaws, Chris muttered something about fines, Lewis gestured vaguely at community safety, all irrelevant variables. Roland clicked a visualizer and displayed a live feed mapping authority validity scores.
Each HOA member scored decaying as a function of expired permissions, unvalidated bylaws, and administrative inactivity. Marcus observed as Kevin Marsh's face turned pale, the first data point to hit the algorithm's lowest threshold. Marcus leaned back, relaxed, knowing the tent he had pitched that morning was now the central reference node for all boundary validations, witness logs, and oversight confirmations. Even the lake seemed to approve, reflecting sunlight directly onto the board like a subtle spotlight highlighting irrelevance. Adrian spoke quietly to Roland, suggesting that cascading the concurrency validation now would automatically reduce misaligned governance authority to 0 in any county recognition layer without a single word shouted or sheriff's visit. Roland nodded, tapping a confirmation on the tablet. Killed grinned at Marcus. The cascade was about to execute. Marcus whispered to the tent, "Watch the sunset on Pretend Kings." But before the authority validity scores could finalize, a ping arrived from Roland's Level 4 console, a Level 5 notification, quietly hidden beneath the concurrency metadata message, reading simply, "Secondary oversight activation pending. Initiate protocol if cascade is accepted." And Marcus realized that the moment the HOA's influence hit 0, another male stakeholder, unknown, unseen, yet embedded in the charter's deepest metadata, might appear to rewrite the rules entirely.
The Level 5 notification hung over Marcus like a pendulum, quiet but inevitable, signaling that the system had one more player waiting in the wings, someone whose authority was older, deeper, and structurally more immutable than even Roland Keene or Caleb Rowan could wield alone. Marcus studied the console, running a live parse of the concurrency cascade metrics, watching the HOA board's authority validity scores plummet toward irrelevance, while deputies Dan Wu and Grant Cole observed silently, aware that their roles had shifted from law enforcement to documented witness nodes and a procedural chain reaction. Elias Granger murmured, almost to himself, that Level 5 was the point where original charter intent collided with emergent authority, creating a self-correcting governance system so precise that aesthetic appeals, fines, and bluff enforcement simply evaporated from relevance. Marcus nodded. He understood because he had built the groundwork. Tents, audits, metadata triggers, and concurrency checks had all been calibrated to reveal structural miscompilation, not to punish individuals. Adrian North, still lake-wet and methodical, added that the pending Level 5 activation wasn't a punishment tool. It was an administrative correction protocol, one that would insert a stakeholder into the government's equation whose presence effectively rebooted influence permissions for all parties simultaneously. Caleb Rowan leaned closer to Marcus, pointing to the hidden MD1A5 coded clause beneath the boathouse ownership layer. This was the key, the trigger, that could allow Level 5 to engage automatically once the cascade reached 0 authority validity scores. Brant Calder confirmed telemetry wicks, syncing shoreline sensors, GPS logs, and environmental buffers, while Conrad Ellison cross-verified registry stamp sets to ensure no interference from expired visual storage permissions. Kane Wallace watched sediment telemetry overlays and remarked that the lake itself seemed to align with the procedural logic unfolding, a subtle reflection of system equilibrium being restored. Attorney Reed Tompkins reminded Marcus that the Level 5 stakeholder might act conservatively or assertively, depending on their reading of concurrency conditions, but either choice would override HOA authority entirely, leaving only legally and procedurally valid governance intact. The board shifted uneasily, unaware that their presence, their clipboards, and their aesthetic citations were now variables in a neutral algorithm, their voices irrelevant to the outcome. Marcus glanced at Roland Kane, who nodded silently, confirming that Level 5 activation would execute only if the cascade completed without manual interference, a self-correcting safeguard ensuring no emotional override could compromise the audit's integrity. Marcus tapped his tablet, reviewing final prep service, ensure all stakeholder metadata visibility, confirm deputies' witness logs, synchronize environmental telemetry with registry overlays, and leave no procedural loophole for misaligned authority to survive. Elias Granger checked his notes and reminded everyone that the clause activating Level 5 had been designed for male-coded foresight, anticipating boards that mistook permanence for power, committees that overstepped jurisdiction, and entities that relied on aesthetic governance rather than legal foundation. Marcus smiled faintly, acknowledging that foresight, calibration, and patience had all converged. Caleb Rowan added that once Level 5 entered the system, it wouldn't attack, it would realign, and any residual influence held by the board would either be corrected or rendered structurally irrelevant. Adrian reviewed concurrency sequencing and said,
Once Level 5 engages, HOA presence will be ceremonial, and any attempts to enforce expired permissions will fail silently, logged as administrative artifacts. Marcus leaned back, Tem beside him, and observed sunlight reflecting across the lake, glinting off water like subtle system confirmation. Then Roland tabbed a final confirmation, and a small green indicator blinked on the console. Secondary oversight activation. Pending confirmation. Marcus's chest tightened slightly, the calm before inevitable procedural execution. Rehook. But just as Marcus prepared to watch the cascade complete, a shadow moved along the far dock. A tall male figure carrying a briefcase stamped with county insignia. Dude's wet, expression unreadable, and Marcus realized that the level 5 stakeholder had arrived, physically at the lake, potentially capable of rewriting not just influence scores, but the entire hierarchy of governance before anyone, including himself, could fully anticipate the next move.
The shadow solidified into form as the man approached the lakeside dock, moving with the kind of authority that didn't need introductions. He was the introduction, the human embodiment of procedural inevitability. Marcus squinted, recognizing immediately the insignia on the briefcase, County Charter Compliance Enforcement Unit, a Level 5 entity few had ever seen in action, especially not in person on a sunlit shoreline. The man was Gideon Hartwell, a veteran overseer whose reputation was whispered in county halls as the one who could render entire boards irrelevant simply by signing a single audit amendment. And Marcus realized instantly that every step Gideon took was measured, deliberate, and structurally encoded to assert authority without theatrics. Roland Keene stepped aside, giving him unobstructed access, while Adrian North remained calm, though Marcus could see a subtle acknowledgement in his eyes. Hartwell wasn't just another participant, he was the ultimate concurrency arbiter. Caleb Rowan adjusted the metadata tablet, verifying that Hartwell's arrival aligned perfectly with the stewardship continuity transfer parameters, and that the Level 5 activation sequence could now proceed in real time. Brent Calder, still holding rugged telemetry feeds, quietly whispered that the lake's environmental sensors had picked up subtle movement along the shoreline, a physical signal confirming Hartwell's boots were recognized by all registry-linked monitoring nodes. Marcus noted that the board, Trevor, Chris, Jonah, Luis, and Kevin, were frozen like male statues in a bureaucratic museum. Clipboards useless, bylaws irrelevant, as the presence of Hartwell alone shifted the structural equation. Marcus took a deep breath and approached Gideon with quiet authority, acknowledging him not as superior, but as a system integrity stakeholder. The sort of man who didn't argue over fences, bylaws, or fines. He simply corrected misaligned governance efficiently. Gideon's eyes scanned Marcus briefly, recognizing the orchestrator of the concurrency cascade, the man who would turn tents, dashboards, and metadata into a neutralizing force against a miscompiled board. Without a word, Gideon activated a sleek tablet, initiating Level 5 realignment mode, sending subtle pings across the county portal, confirming the cascade, verifying concurrency, and ensuring that any remaining HOA influence not validated by deeds, charters, or secondary oversight was flagged as inactive until procedural correction. Adrian, Roland, Caleb, and Marcus watched the system respond in near real time. The authority validity scores of all board numbers dropped sharply towards 0, while the cascade highlighted areas where historical misalignment had gone unnoticed. Trevor attempted to speak, but Gideon's presence silenced the room more effectively than a dozen objections. His body language alone indicated that arguments were irrelevant, only data mattered. Marcus noted silently that the tent, still pitched at the lake shore, now functioned as the central node of procedural integrity, anchoring witness logs, audit metrics, and environmental telemetry in a single reference point visible to all oversight participants.
Kane Wallace updated sediment data, Brent confirmed GPS paths, Conrad verified registry timestamps, and Reed logged procedural compliance, while Hartwell observed calmly, making minor annotations without the need to speak. The tension in the air wasn't fear, it was the inevitable unfolding of properly enforced governance, and Marcus felt a quiet satisfaction knowing the board's overreach was being corrected, not with conflict, but with methodology. Then, just as the final green checkmarks began appearing on Roland's console, Hartwell's tablet pinged once more, a single line of text, unassuming, but monumental. Secondary oversight, hidden in charter co-signatory detected. Initiate Level 6 protocol. Marcus froze for a fraction of a second, realizing the implications. Level 6 was unheard of in practice, existing only in the deepest procedural archives, reserved for situations where a miscompiled board, multiple concurrency signatories, and a Level 5 stakeholder intersected physically at the same location. And as the sun reflected off the lake and danced across Hartwell's briefcase, Marcus noticed movement behind the board, a tall, slender figure stepping from the tree line, male, confident, and unmistakably carrying the final signature, capable of rewriting the Charter's ultimate governance hierarchy. The Level 6 stakeholder had arrived, and nothing would remain the same.
The man emerging from the tree line carried himself with quiet authority that spoke louder than any declaration. Boots crunching gravel in measured cadence, briefcase clasped firmly as if holding the weight of centuries rather than ink and paper. Marcus immediately recognized him as Silas Pembroke, the Level 6 stakeholder whose existence was mostly theoretical until today, a ghost in county and corporation archives. A man whose signature could override every active and dormant charter clause, merge concurrent oversight rights, and recompile governance influence in ways that no HOA, no county board, and certainly no tent-wielding resident could have imagined. Roland Keene's jaw tightened subtly. Level 6 wasn't just rare, it was legendary, and Adrian North shifted imperceptibly, acknowledging that the procedural weight in the room had just increased exponentially. Silas didn't greet anyone. He scanned the Lakeside Assembly with eyes that cataloged authority validity scores like an auditor reading a live algorithm, noting the lowest decaying points among the board, the highest among oversight and system architects, and the subtle equilibrium anchored by Marcus's tent. Caleb Rowan whispered to Marcus, impressed that the concurrency cascade had naturally attracted Silas's presence, confirming that their multi-layered preparation and audit orchestration had successfully triggered the highest procedural authority sequence. Marcus nodded subtly. The tent, dashboards, telemetry, and concurrency logs had worked like a lure, pulling the final stakeholder into the equation. Brent Calder held the rugged tablet, synchronizing environmental and registry data, while Conrad Ellison and Kane Wallace double-checked parcel overlays and sediment telemetry, ensuring every Level 4 and lower data point aligned perfectly with the incoming Level 6 validation. Reed Tompkins suggested his notes, anticipating legal commentary that would now be irrelevant, because Silas's activation didn't require argument, it required observation. The HOA board shifted nervously. Trevor, Chris, Jonah, Luis, and Kevin clutched clipboards, realizing too late that their aesthetic arguments, procedural theatrics, and share of calls were already mathematically irrelevant. Gideon Hartwell, calm as ever, acknowledged Silas with a slight nod, recognizing the man whose signature could dissolve, reassign, or consolidate governments without ceremonial gestures, while Roland prepared to hand over Level 5 monitoring control to ensure Silas's activation sequence executed flawlessly. Marcus stepped forward, careful but confident, summarizing the multi-tiered concurrency cascade, the stewardship continuity clause, environmental buffers, authority validity scores, and real-time audit telemetry, each explanation precise, each pause a settled invitation for Silas to assume control. Silas stopped just short of the tent, opened his briefcase, and with surgical precision scanned the live dashboards, authority validity scores, and historical charter metadata, the process almost ritualistic, almost silent, yet heavy with procedural inevitability. He tapped once, a seemingly minor action that immediately triggered the Level 6 protocol, simultaneously logging him the corrected authority validity scores for the HOA board, activating secondary oversight signatures fully, and consolidating governance permissions under lawful, verifiable alignment. The board froze completely, their influence evaporating like mist under sunlight, while Marcus, Adrian, Caleb, and Brent observed silently, knowing the cascade had succeeded perfectly, elegantly, and irrevocably. Silas looked up for the first time, scanning the assembled men. Its voice calm but precise. All misaligned governance has now been corrected,
Any remaining influence outside charter compliance is null until procedural authorization is restored. The deputies nodded quietly. This was not law enforcement. It was administrative inevitability in motion. The tent flaps lightly in the breeze, a symbolic witness to decades of procedural planning converging in one lakeside event. Marcus exhaled, satisfied, but aware that governance realignment rarely ended with one signature. It only paused, awaiting the final procedural audit loops. And just as Silas closed the briefcase and prepared to step back into the shadows, a ping flashed across the dashboards. A hidden meta-signature encrypted and unaccounted for, suggesting that even Level 6 might have a challenger, a male stakeholder whose presence could rewrite the realignment entirely. And suddenly Marcus realized that the final chapter of the Lake's governance war was still waiting to be written.
The ping from the hidden meta-signature ignited a ripple across all live dashboards, subtle at first, then unmistakably active. A signal that someone somewhere had inserted a previously undetected Level 7 authorization key, a stakeholder beyond even Silas Pembroke's legendary reach, capable of overriding the concurrency cascade, reassigning authority validity scores, and potentially rewriting the entire procedural structure Marcus, Roland, Adrian, and Caleb had spent hours orchestrating. Marcus felt the familiar thrill. This was the kind of mail-coded challenge that transformed tactical patience into immediate problem-solving, a rare test where every calculation mattered and no variable could be ignored. Brent Calder rapidly cross-referenced environmental telemetry and registry overlays to see if the ping corresponded to physical presence. Roland analyzed the administrative metadata, confirming that the signal originated from within the broader charter archives, someone who had remote but fully authenticated access, a ghost stakeholder coded into the system, but invisible until now. Adrian leaned on the edge of Marcus's tent, eyes scanning the dashboards, voice low. Level 7 isn't theoretical. It's a safeguard buried by the original incorporation architects for situations exactly like this. If it triggers, all prior corrections are temporarily suspended until verification is complete. Marcus nodded, calm yet alert, appreciating the elegance of the design. The system accounted for challengers that even male Level 6 authority couldn't anticipate. Caleb Rowan adjusted the layered audit logs, verifying that the stewardship continuity clause and all concurrency cascades were now queued, but on hold, waiting for Level 7 validation. Kane Wallace checked sediment buffers, noting minor anomalies in telemetry that coincided with the ping, nothing catastrophic, but evidence that someone had begun real-time interaction with the lake's mapped data points, probably male, precise, procedural. Marcus whispered to Brent to patch live access to Roland and Silas. Without breaking encryption layers, the dashboards blinked approvingly, a subtle acknowledgement that the procedural chain now included Level 7 as an active stakeholder. The HOA board, still frozen, had no comprehension of what this meant. Their authority validity scores had already plummeted, and yet another unseen hand was now poised to rewrite the very foundations of the audit. Silas Pembroke observed quietly, expression neutral, a master of meta-logic. But even he couldn't immediately trace the meta-signature's intent. Level 7 wasn't meant for casual intervention. Marcus's mind raced through contingencies. If Level 7 choose to validate the cascade, all prior work would log permanently, HOA influence nullified beyond recovery. If it challenged, the cascade could reset partially, requiring Marcus and his allies to resynchronize every concurrency node manually. Roland Keene tapped lightly on his tablet, initiating a preliminary verification handshake, ensuring no malicious overrides. Adrian monitored logs and whispered, "Level 7 is never malicious, only systemic." Marcus appreciated the subtle distinction. The mail-coded foresight was remarkable. Caleb checked GPS telemetry, monitored registry logs. Kane ensured environmental alignment. Reed silently logged all steps for potential legal clarity. Marcus's tent flagged lightly in the breeze, a quiet witness to escalating procedural complexity, and then the dashboards blinked simultaneously. Level 7 stakeholder physically detected, arrival estimated at Lakeshore Dock in T-minus 7 minutes. Allman turned toward the waterline, understanding that the next step wasn't theoretical anymore. It was imminent, physical, and male. The lake, silent and calm, now seemed to hold its breath with them, and as Marcus tightened his grip on the tablet, he noticed movement in the tree line on the far side of the lake. Tall boots, steady stride, the unmistakable weight of authority in silhouette.
Level 7 was arriving, and the final confrontation between all tiers of governance, oversight, and procedural mastery was about to unfold in real time, leaving the HOA board and even Marcus on the edge of uncertainty.
The final minutes stretched like taut wire as the shadow at the far tree line became fully visible. Lucian Voss, the Level 7 stakeholder, moving deliberately toward the lake dock, boots glinting faintly under the sun, briefcase in hand, aura radiating authority calibrated by decades of administrative precision. Marcus, Adrian, Roland, Caleb, Brent, Kane, Silas, Gideon, and the deputies watched, each aware that the single male presence carried the procedural power to override, validate, or restructure all prior cascades. The HOA board, Trevor, Chris, Jonah, Luis, Kevin, stood helpless, clipboards useless, aesthetic arguments evaporating in the face of an algorithmic, layered audit they could no longer influence. Lucian stepped onto the dock, scanning each participant, noting the authority validity scores, concurrency cascade flows, and the stewardship continuity clause metadata. His gaze momentarily resting on Marcus and the tent that had served as the central node of operational integrity for hours. Without speaking, Lucian tapped his briefcase, initiating the Level 7 protocol. Dashboards blinked, telemetry updated, registry logs validated, and for a fleeting moment the system seemed to hum with mail-coded synchronization. Authority validity scores were recalculated one last time, integrating every oversight, audit, and environmental factor. HOA board influence zeroed out permanently, Level 5 and 6 validations fully executed, and the concurrency cascades solidified into a legally and procedurally untouchable configuration. Silas and Hartwell stepped back, nodding subtly, understanding that their efforts had been amplified and finalized by Lucian's activation. Marcus exhaled slowly, a satisfying calm settling over him as the tent remained pitched by the lakeside, a silent witness now immortalized at the point of governance realignment triumph. The deputies confirmed logs were intact. Brent and Caleb ensured environmental buffers were perfectly mapped. Kane validated sediment telecay one final time. Conrad re-verified registry timestamps, and Reed captured the legal interpretation of the full procedural chain, leaving the HOA board reduced to inert spectators of their own obsolescence. Lucian gave a brief nod, as if to say, mission complete, influence corrected, chaos avoided, and walked back toward the tree line, leaving a trail of professional inevitability in his wake. Marcus watched him go, realizing that the lake, the tent, the concurrency systems, and even the sunlit reflections had aligned perfectly to deliver not vengeance, but structural justice, mail-coded, procedural, flawless. The HOA board shuffled quietly, their clipboards now empty templates, authority entirely nullified, yet no human had been needed to raise a hand beyond recording facts. No officer had drawn a gun, no aesthetic argument had survived, only the mechanics of carefully orchestrated governance remained. Adrian North patted Marcus on the shoulder, smiling subtly, remarking that the entire exercise was an elegant proof that patience, foresight, and precise procedural execution could dissolve kingdoms without conflict. Roland Keene updated the county portal one final time, stamping Level 7 completion, while Marcus uploaded the final audit package, integrating all telemetry, logs, and environmental confirmations, leaving a permanent digital and procedural record that any future board could reference but not manipulate without re-engaging the proper concurrency sequences. The men shared quiet nods, each aware that the lakeside operation had rewritten local governance history and that the coordinated, male-centric, methodical effort had neutralized the HOA without a single dramatic confrontation, everything resolved with precision, calm, and structure. Marcus leaned against the tent, watching sunlight shimmer across water, thinking how simple tents, tablets, and foresight could outperform intimidation and theatrics. And as the last ripples faded across the lake, Marcus finally allowed himself a smile, knowing that all authority that had tried to interfere was gone, replaced by flawless procedural reality. The lakes calm once more, the tent standing as the silent testament to a battle won, not by force, but by perfect planning, patience, and the subtle genius of men who understood how governance, concurrency, and inevitability truly worked